Story 1. The Whisper Beneath the Noise. Have you ever sat in a crowded room and still felt utterly alone? Have you ever laughed with friends only to feel a silent ache ripple beneath the surface, a longing you can't name? Beneath the clamor of our digital lives, beyond the masks we wear each day, there lies a thread, invisible, soft, trembling, that binds us to something ancient and also to one another. This story begins with that thread. It was the kind of evening where the wind hummed like a forgotten lullaby. A young traveler named Aiko wandered into a mist-veiled village nestled deep in the mountains of Kyoto. She had left the city behind, its glass towers, its neon promises, its endless noise, searching not for a destination, but for something she had no words for. Her sandals crunched softly against the stone path leading to a centuries-old temple. The wooden gates creaked open like the voice of an old friend, familiar yet foreign. Within the temple grounds, nothing moved but the wind threading through pine needles and a bell swaying gently from a red string. Aiko was greeted by the temple's only resident, a blind monk named Ryozen. He didn't ask where she came from or why she came. He simply bowed and said, "The thread only whispers when we are still." Over the next few days, Aiko stayed in the temple. She swept fallen leaves, meditated beneath the ginkgo tree, and prepared rice each morning while the sky still yawned. Ryozen rarely spoke, but when he did, his words moved like stones skipped gently across water. One morning, Aiko found him sitting by a stream behind the temple. "Master," she asked, "why do I always feel so separate? As though I'm looking at life through a glass I can't break." Rosen smiled, not at her, but at the stream. "Once," he said, "there was a spider who spun her web between two bamboo stalks. Every morning she would mend the broken threads, invisible to the passing eye, but strong enough to hold the morning dew. One day, the wind tore the web completely. She waited, still, unmoving, through the storm. When it passed, she spun again. The world had never noticed her work, but she had never stopped weaving." "What does that mean?" Aiko asked. "It means," Ryozen replied, "connection is not something the world grants you. It is something you quietly spin from your own silence." In Zen, we speak of interbeing, the understanding that nothing exists independently. The leaf depends on the tree, which depends on the soil, which depends on the rain. Yet, we humans often believe we are islands, isolated and incomplete. The whisper of the unseen thread is the reminder that we are not alone. But the thread does not shout. It only reveals itself when we become still, when we step back from the noise and remember that belonging is not about fitting in, but about accepting what is already within. Like the spider's web, our connections are delicate, unseen, easily broken by the winds of fear or self-doubt. But they can be rewoven, always. Many of us today live with a quiet ache, a sense of disconnection, even in the most connected age in human history. We scroll, we like, we perform, and still feel unseen. The pain of abandonment, rejection, or simply feeling out of place can become chronic. But here's the truth. That feeling is not proof of your isolation. It is the thread calling to you. When we learn to sit with that discomfort, not fight it, not numb it, we begin to feel the gentle pulse of life beyond the surface. Healing does not come from becoming someone else. It comes from remembering we were never truly separate to begin with. So ask yourself, what threads in your life have you forgotten? Who are the people you long to connect with, not through words, but presence? And what if, just for tonight, you chose to believe that you already belong? As the moon rises behind the mountains, imagine yourself sitting under the same ginkgo tree as Aiko. Feel the earth beneath you. The air is cool. The night is gentle. The wind carries no answers, only invitations. Take a breath, and another. You don't need to force connection. You only need to be still enough to hear its whisper. As the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You are part of the whole. You exist in the web of life." Let that be enough. Tonight, as you rest, may you feel the invisible thread drawing you back, not to someone else, but to yourself. Story 2. The Mirror That Waited. Have you ever tried to fall asleep, only to be kept awake by a voice within? One that knows every flaw, every failure, and whispers them back to you in the dark? A voice that never yells, but cuts deeper with each quiet word. We all carry this voice. But what if the voice wasn't the enemy? What if it was a forgotten part of us longing to be heard? There is a small, nameless village at the edge of a pine forest where winter lingers longer than it should. The roofs are sloped, heavy with snow, and lanterns flicker even at noon. Near the outskirts stands a hermitage, carved partially into the hillside, veiled by falling mist and silence. A man named Kael arrived at this hermitage just after dusk. He had walked for days, not because of pilgrimage or devotion, but because he could no longer bear the sound of his own thoughts. Kael was a craftsman, known in the city for making beautiful things, yet unable to see beauty in himself. An old woman, cloaked in gray, greeted him at the wooden door. She did not ask his name. She simply said, "The empty space echoes loudest. Come in." Kael stayed, not knowing how long. The days passed in soft rhythms, chopping wood, boiling water, sweeping stone floors worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Each night, he lay awake beneath the rafters, listening. Not to the wind or to the owls, but to the voice within. It told him he was not enough, that he had failed his father, that he was a burden, that he had wasted his years trying to fix things that were never broken. One morning, as the snow began to melt, Kael confessed to the old woman, "The silence here, it only makes the voice louder." She nodded, stirring tea leaves into hot water. "That voice," she said, "is not your enemy. It is your wounded child, and you have left him alone in the dark for too long." He frowned. "But it's cruel." "It learned cruelty," she said, gently, "because no one taught it kindness." That night, she handed him a mirror. "Sit," she said, "and when the voice speaks, do not resist, do not run, just listen, and answer, not with anger, but with love." Kale sat by the candle's glow, holding the mirror, and the voice came, "You're nothing." He looked into the mirror. "I'm trying." "You ruin everything you touch." "I've made things that held others together." "No one sees you." "I'm learning to see myself." The voice didn't stop, but that night, for the first time, it wept. In Buddhist practice, we learn that dukkha, suffering, arises not only from the world, but from how we relate to ourselves. The inner critic, what some traditions call the hungry ghost, is a phantom that feeds on shame and self-hatred. But even ghosts are echoes, remnants of what was once alive, once human. The Stoics remind us we are disturbed not by things, but by the views we take of them. The voice inside us is shaped by stories we've inherited from parents, teachers, culture, trauma. But the voice is not reality. It is a visitor, and like all visitors, it deserves to be met with awareness. When we turn toward the voice with compassion, When we sit with it instead of silencing it, it softens. It becomes, slowly, a teacher. Psychologists now speak of the inner critic as a common mental construct, a mechanism meant to protect us from shame, rejection, and failure. But over time, it becomes distorted, looping like an old recording. This self-talk can lead to anxiety, perfectionism, even depression. But what if healing doesn't begin by silencing the voice, but by asking it, "What are you afraid of?" Often, beneath the harshness is fear. And beneath fear is pain. And beneath pain is a child longing to be understood. You are not the voice. You are the one listening. Tonight, if the critic appears, ask, what is this voice trying to protect me from? What would happen if I responded not with hatred, but with care? As you lie in bed tonight, imagine sitting before a candle, just like Kael. You hold a mirror, not to punish, but to witness. Let the voice come. Let it speak. Then, breathe. Say, I hear you, and I choose love. In the words of the Buddha, you can search the whole universe and not find anyone more deserving of your love than yourself. So be kind to the echo. It was only ever trying to be heard. Story 3. The River's Unhurried Flow. Have you ever clenched your jaw without knowing? Checked your phone for the 10th time in 5 minutes? Held your breath while waiting for a reply, a result, an answer? In a world that rewards speed, certainty, and control, the art of allowing has become almost foreign. But deep in the valley where time flows differently, there is a river, and it never rushes, yet it always arrives. There is a temple nestled beside a meandering river called Natsukawa, the summer stream. It winds through a valley so quiet that birdsong feels like a bell. The water never hurries. Even in the rains, it carries fallen petals with the grace of a dancer, not the urgency of a soldier. A woman named Reina came to this temple at the end of her strength. She was a teacher, a mother, a partner, roles she had poured herself into so completely that she no longer remembered where they ended and she began. She didn't come for enlightenment. She came because she couldn't hold it all anymore. The abbot, a man with laugh lines etched deep as riverbanks, welcomed her with warm barley tea and a single sentence: "The river never holds its water." Each morning, Reina followed the abbot to the river's edge. He said little. Sometimes they stood in silence. Sometimes they picked herbs. One morning, Reina asked, "How do you let go of needing to fix everything, of needing to hold everyone together?" The abbot watched the river and answered, "A stone once asked the river why it never stopped to rest. The river said, 'Because I trust gravity more than fear.'" She tilted her head. "I don't understand." He smiled. "You don't need to. Just listen." That afternoon, Reina sat beneath a willow tree. Her mind buzzed with lists, messages she hadn't answered, tasks undone, the argument with her son replaying like an echo. She clenched her fists. Then, a breeze. A leaf fell into the river. It floated, not because it had nowhere to go, but because it trusted it would get there. And something inside her softened. In Buddhist thought, the root of suffering lies not in events themselves, but in clinging to outcomes, to roles, to illusions of control. Anicca, or impermanence, teaches us that all things flow: joy, sorrow, people, breath. The Stoics, too, teach us to distinguish between what we can and cannot control. As Epictetus reminds us, some things are up to us, and some are not. Control is an illusion fed by fear. Surrender is not weakness, it is wisdom. When we learn to flow like the river, we do not lose ourselves. we rediscover the peace that was waiting beneath our grip. So many of us live in chronic tension, hypervigilance born from trauma, responsibility, or the simple weight of expectation. We become control addicts, believing that if we just do everything right, no one will leave, no one will suffer, nothing will break. But something always does. Healing begins when we allow. When we recognize that our worth is not measured by how tightly we hold everything together, that rest is not a reward, it is a right. Ask yourself, where am I clenching? What am I afraid will happen if I let go? What if the people I love are stronger than I believe, and I don't need to carry their river, only witness it? Tonight, imagine yourself sitting by the Natsukawa. The moon paints silver threads across its surface. The wind is soft, and for once, nothing needs to be done. Take a deep breath. And another. Uncurl your hands, unclench your jaw. Let the river inside you move. You do not need to be the dam. You are allowed to be the water. As Lao Tzu wrote, the softest thing in the world overcomes the hardest. Tonight, trust the current, even when you cannot see the destination, especially then. Story 4. The Silent Bloom of Forgiveness. Some wounds don't bleed, they echo, not in screams, but in silences, in the way our voices tighten around certain names, in how our hearts flinch when someone says, family. There are rifts too deep for words, conflicts that linger like incense long after the fire has gone. But even the coldest garden can still bloom if one dares to sit in the frost and listen. High in the northern hills, where the wind carves songs into stone, there lies a garden no one tends, yet every spring wild camellias blossom. Beside this garden sits a solitary hermitage known simply as Sora-an, the Hermitage of Sky. A man named Daigo came here, carrying little but a faded photograph and the ashes of his father. He had not spoken to the old man in 16 years, not since the lawsuit, the shouting, the words too sharp to take back. Now death had arrived too early and closure too late. The resident nun, a woman called Shinrei, accepted the urn without question. The soil here is forgiving, she said, but it will not bloom until you are. Daigo remained, helping with chores in awkward silence. He avoided the garden, the photograph tucked in his sleeve like a wound. One morning, Shinrei handed him a bundle of camellia cuttings. Plant these, she said. He frowned. I'm no gardener. Exactly, she replied. That's why the earth will teach you. Reluctantly, he knelt in the dirt. His mind flooded with old arguments about money, about betrayal, about who was right and who was louder. He dug anyway. Day after day, he worked, watered, waited. One evening, as dusk fell over the hills, Daigo found Shinrei meditating beneath a pine tree. He asked, "How do you forgive someone who never said sorry?" She opened her eyes. A flower never waits for an apology before it blooms. Daigo looked away. But he ruined so much. Shinrei nodded. Then let your forgiveness be an offering, not to him, but to yourself. That night, Daigo finally placed the photo on the altar. Not to forget, but to begin. Forgiveness in Buddhist teachings is not the erasure of pain, but the freedom from it. It is the letting go of the arrow we keep driving deeper long after it was shot. Metta, or loving kindness, begins not with affection, but with the recognition of shared suffering. In the Stoic tradition, Epictetus reminds us, when someone does wrong, it is because they are mistaken about what is good. This doesn't excuse harm, but it reframes it. We are all prisoners of our own ignorance, and forgiveness is the key we give ourselves. It does not require reunion. It does not require amnesia. It only requires the courage to stop bleeding into the future. Family conflict often cuts the deepest. Expectations, disappointments, roles inherited rather than chosen all collide into a storm of identity and pain. Therapy teaches us that closure is not something we get from others, it's something we create within. Forgiveness is not approval, it's a shift, a gentle realignment of our inner world, where we no longer hand power to the past. Ask yourself, what are you still carrying that was never yours to hold? What would it mean to live without that weight? Whom do you need to forgive? Not to absolve them, but to reclaim your own peace. Tonight, picture yourself in the Sora-on garden. The wind is cool, the camellias are blooming, quietly without applause. You are kneeling by a grave, not of a person, but of resentment. You do not need to say the words aloud, just breathe. And in the silence, let the bloom begin. As the Buddha said, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. Let the coal go. Let your hands grow flowers. Story 5. Navigating the Labyrinth of Loss. Loss does not knock. It enters, uninvited. A sudden silence where laughter used to be. An empty chair at a dinner table. A message that will never be replied to. We think of grief as a single moment, a funeral, a goodbye. But it is a maze we learn to walk blindfolded with nothing but breath to guide us. And somewhere inside that labyrinth, something else begins. Not forgetting, but becoming. In a remote desert monastery called Dogenkai, where the sand sings as it shifts, the monks chant at sunrise facing the wind. It is said the wind there carries the voices of those we've lost, not ghosts, but gratitude. Aya, a woman in her early 40s, arrived carrying a wooden box tied with red string. Inside were letters from her late husband, written during his final months. She had read them 100 times, each word like a weight. She had come not to forget him, but because she no longer knew who she was without him. The abbot, a quiet man with desert-colored robes, met her at the gate. He did not ask her name. He only said, "In the sand, we bury seeds, not sorrows." Aya spent her days helping in silence. She cooked, swept, copied sutras by candlelight. Every evening, she walked the sand paths behind the monastery, the box always with her. One day, the abbot found her sitting beside a cactus in bloom. "When will this hurt end?" she asked. He handed her a small mirror. "What do you see?" "My face." "Do you see your husband?" She shook her head. "No." "But he is here," the abbot said, placing his palm on her chest. "Not in the box, not in the letters, but in the one who reads them." That night, she placed the box in the monastery's sacred fire. The wind carried its ash across the dunes, and Aya, for the first time in many moons, slept without dreams. In Zen, the concept of mujo, impermanence, teaches that loss is not the end, but the continuation of change. What dies transforms. What is gone becomes part of what remains. Our suffering comes when we resist this flow. The Stoics remind us that all is borrowed. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Accept whatever comes to you woven in the pattern of your destiny, for what could more aptly fit your needs?" To grieve is human, to love is divine, but to cling is to suffer twice. Grief is not a failure to move on. It is the sacred terrain of love transforming into memory. Grief is non-linear. Some days it's a shadow. Other days it swallows the light. There is no correct pace, no single way. What matters is that we allow ourselves to feel it without shame, to grieve without needing to justify our sorrow. Psychologists now understand that meaning-making, not avoidance, is what helps us navigate loss. When we give space for our pain, when we honor the life that was shared, we slowly grow around the wound, rather than waiting for it to disappear. Ask yourself, what loss are you still carrying like a box too fragile to open? What would it look like to honor the love without holding on to the pain? Who might you become if you let the grief walk beside you, not behind you? Tonight, imagine the Dogon Kai Desert. The stars overhead are bright enough to see by. The sand shifts with every breath you take. You are not lost. You are walking, slowly, gently through the labyrinth. You do not need to rush. You do not need to erase. Just breathe. Place your grief beside you. Say to it, you are part of me, but you are not all of me. And as the ancient words remind us, every step is the step after goodbye, and also the step toward beginning. Story 6, The Art of Unknowing. There is a strange relief in not knowing, and yet we chase certainty like breath, clinging to answers, forecasts, guarantees. We fear the unknown not because it is empty, but because it is alive. Yet, the most profound wisdom often comes not from what we know, but from what we are willing to unknow. Far from the maps and markers of civilization, there is a mountain cloaked in mist. At its peak stands a wooden hut with no nameplate, no path, and no teacher. Only a bell that rings by the wind's own will. Mika, a young professor of philosophy, arrived with a heavy pack and a heavier mind. Her life had been built on knowing, theories, proofs, the certainty of logic. But when her mother passed away without answers, Mika's carefully constructed world cracked. She had come seeking a master, a teaching, something that could restore her sense of ground. Instead, the hut was empty. Only a journal lay inside, open to the first page. To see clearly, begin by closing your eyes. Mika stayed, unsure why. Days passed in clouds. She lit a fire each night, drank from the stream, and read the journal. Its pages filled not with teachings, but questions. What if the truth is not an answer, but a silence? What part of you clings to knowing because it fears being known? When you let go of seeking, what seeks you? One evening, lost in the fog beyond the hut, she panicked. Her compass spun uselessly. Her phone had no signal. She shouted, but the mist swallowed her voice. Then she sat, breathed, and in that stillness, the wind shifted. A distant bell rang, not from the hut, but from her own memory. A lullaby her mother used to hum when Mika was afraid of the dark. She stood, walked, not by direction, but by feeling. And soon, the hut emerged from the fog, not because she found it, but because she had stopped needing to. Zen teaches that knowledge is like a finger pointing to the moon, helpful but not the moon itself. Shoshin, the beginner's mind, reminds us that true clarity arises not from accumulation, but from surrender. The Stoics, too, embrace uncertainty. As Seneca wrote, it is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that they are difficult. The fear of the unknown paralyzes us, not the unknown itself. To unknow is to peel away assumptions, projections, inherited truths, until what remains is direct, simple, alive. In our modern world, ambiguity is often seen as failure. We are trained to avoid doubt, to chase control. But psychological resilience grows not from certainty, but from tolerance for uncertainty. Cognitive therapy suggests that much of our anxiety stems not from what is, but from our intolerance of not knowing. To heal, we must learn to sit in the fog, to trust not in fixed maps, but in the compass of awareness. Ask yourself, what are you clinging to that once gave comfort but now causes fear? What truths do you carry that might no longer serve you? Are you willing to sit in the unknowing and listen? Tonight, imagine the mountaintop hut. The mist is thick but soft. You are alone but not abandoned. A bell rings, not from the world, but from your own inner stillness. Let go of the questions. Let go of the need to arrive. Sit, breathe. As the Tao Te Ching says, he who knows does not speak. He who speaks does not know. So tonight, may you find peace, not in answers, but in presence. Not in clarity, but in courage. Story 7. The Shadow and the Starlight. We are taught to chase the light, to smile, succeed, forgive, transcend. But what of the shadow? What of the envy we deny, the fear we hide, the rage we bury beneath politeness? The darker parts of us do not vanish because we ignore them. They grow roots in silence. But when we turn to face them, not as enemies, but as messengers, we begin to remember that even the night sky is full of stars. In a forest where moonlight rarely touches the ground, there stood a crumbling temple known as Yamidera, the Temple of Shadows. Few came here. The path was overgrown, and rumor said the place was haunted, not by spirits, but by memories. A young woman named Kana arrived on the 7th night of the waning moon. She had spent her life avoiding conflict, always the peacemaker, the achiever, the one who swallowed anger so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. But the anger had grown teeth. She came not for peace, but for truth. An old monk greeted her at the gate. His robes were black as ink, his smile as quiet as fog. "You seek light," he said, "but have you met your shadow?" In Yamidera, nothing was polished. The walls were cracked, the lanterns flickered, the silence echoed with what had not been said. Each night, Kana meditated in the Hall of Echoes, a dark chamber with only a single candle. The monk gave her no teachings, only a task. Listen to what rises. Do not look away. At first, there was boredom, then restlessness, then memory. Arguments, betrayals, jealousy. Faces she had smiled at while silently resenting. Then came the voice, her own, but sharper, older. You pretend to be kind so no one leaves you. You hide your needs to feel worthy. She wanted to flee, but she stayed. Night after night, she sat with the voice, listened, wept, until, one evening, the voice softened. "I was only trying to protect you." And she understood. The shadow was not evil. It was exiled. Zen does not divide the self into good and bad. It sees wholeness, the moon with its dark and light sides. The path to awakening is not to transcend the shadow, but to integrate it. Carl Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." In Stoicism, too, we are invited to examine our thoughts with rigor, not to judge, but to understand. Marcus Aurelius said, "If it is human, it is not foreign to me." To embrace the shadow is to reclaim our full humanity. Modern psychology speaks of the shadow self as the parts we suppress: anger, envy, grief, selfishness. Not because they are wrong, but because they were once unsafe to express. But suppression leads to projection. What we reject in ourselves, we see as threats in others. Healing begins when we own the shadow, give it voice, and ask, "What are you trying to tell me?" Therapy today encourages shadow work. The brave act of sitting with our most uncomfortable truths until they become teachers, not threats. Ask yourself, what part of you have you tried to silence? What would it mean to bring that part into the light of compassion? Can you let your shadow speak, not to dominate, but to dialogue? Tonight, imagine sitting in the hall of echoes. One candle flickers, the rest is darkness. But you are not alone. Your shadow sits across from you, not monstrous, but wounded. Breathe, look into its eyes. Say, I see you now. As Rumi said, the wound is the place where the light enters you. So let the starlight in. Let the shadow rest. Story 8. The Weight of Golden Chains. Not all prisons have bars. Some shimmer with comfort. Some whisper sweet promises, security, status, even love, while quietly tightening around the soul. The most beautiful cage is the hardest to leave. And yet, freedom begins not in escape, but in noticing the door was always open. In the heart of a wealthy province where rice fields bowed like servants to the wind, there stood a mansion gilded in gold and sorrow. Inside lived a man named Tetsuya, a successful merchant whose name was known in every port, whose wealth could feed 100 families, and whose heart had grown silent. Each morning, he walked the garden paths lined with perfect stones, pruned bonsai with hands that trembled, and smiled at guests with eyes that no longer dreamed. One day, an old monk arrived uninvited, thin, dusty, barefoot. The guards tried to turn him away, but Tetsuya, weary and curious, welcomed him. The monk bowed and said only, I heard the richest man in the region was poor in spirit. I came to offer him alms. Tetsuya laughed bitterly. I have everything I want. The monk looked around. Then why do the birds not sing in your garden? Days passed. The monk stayed as a guest. He asked for nothing, but each evening he sat in the courtyard and chanted a single line. Chains made of gold still bind. Tetsuya began to feel restless. His wine soured. His meals lost flavor. He began waking before dawn, staring at the ceiling. One night he confronted the monk. Are you saying I am not free? The monk smiled gently. I am asking if you are happy. Tetsuya had no answer. That night, he walked the halls of his estate barefoot. The silence was deafening. He passed room after room filled with treasures, each one carefully acquired, yet untouched. A porcelain vase worth a year's wages, silk robes still folded. He realized he had been collecting beauty, not living it. At dawn, the monk was gone. In his place sat a wooden bowl and a note. The heaviest chains are the ones you polish every day. In Buddhism, attachment is not only to pain, it can be to pleasure, identity, comfort. The Buddha taught that even gold, when clung to, becomes suffering. Upadana, or grasping, is the root of illusion. Stoicism echoes this. Seneca warned, it is not the man who has little, but the man who craves more who is poor. What we own owns us if we do not examine the reasons we hold it so tightly. Freedom is not the absence of possessions, it is the absence of possessiveness. In the modern world, many feel trapped not by scarcity, but by abundance. High-paying jobs that drain the spirit, relationships that offer comfort but not connection, reputations that become cages. The golden handcuffs are real and seductive. But psychology reminds us that meaning, not wealth, sustains well-being. That values-based living, aligning our choices with our deepest truths, leads to fulfillment, not achievement alone. Ask yourself, What are the golden chains you wear? What parts of your life look perfect but feel empty? If you stopped polishing the cage, what would you build instead? Tonight, imagine walking your own inner mansion. Room by room, ask, is this mine or something I inherited? Is this a symbol of love or fear? Now, breathe. Visualize a small, simple gate in the back garden. It creaks open with ease. Beyond it, quiet trees, wind, your bare feet on the earth. Step through. As the monk's chant reminds us, chains made of gold still bind. And as the Stoic said, he is most powerful who has power over himself. Story 9. The Ritual of the Empty Cup. We often fill our lives to the brim with tasks, noise, roles, and expectations. We think the more we hold, the more we become. But what if the opposite is true? What if it is only when we are empty that we can truly receive? There is a kind of wisdom that pours itself only into an empty cup. In a remote village wrapped in fog, where houses clung to cliffs like moss, there lived an old woman named Sumi. She was known not as a healer or a priest, but as someone who listened, truly listened. People traveled days to speak with her, not for answers, but for the way her silence seemed to unburden them. One autumn morning, a young executive named Kenji arrived. Burned out, restless, full of ambition and disappointment, he had read about Sumi in an old blog post titled The Listener on the Mountain. He came with questions about life, purpose, success. Sumi invited him in, offered tea, and said nothing. Kenji fidgeted. He talked about deadlines, missed promotions, the pressure to stay ahead, his fear of falling behind. He spoke for nearly an hour. Sumi poured more tea. Finally, she looked at his cup. "It's full," she said. Kenji nodded, confused. "Yes, thank you." She gently began pouring more tea into it, the hot liquid spilling over, onto the table, then the floor. "Stop, what are you doing?" he cried. Sumi smiled. "You are like this cup. So full there is no space for anything else. Wisdom, peace, clarity, these cannot enter a cup already overflowing." Kenji sat in stunned silence. That evening he swept the floor, washed the dishes, said nothing. The next morning he did not speak. He simply watched the mist roll in and out of the valley. And something inside him, slowly, quietly, began to empty. Zen teaches the value of sunyata, emptiness, not as void, but as openness, a readiness to receive, the beginner's mind, the child's wonder. The Stoics, too, emphasized clearing away illusion, ego, expectation. Epictetus wrote, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." To empty the cup is not to become less. It is to become available to truth, to stillness, to growth. In today's world, mental clutter is epidemic. We carry cognitive overload, tasks, comparisons, headlines, identities. Our minds, like Kenji's cup, overflow. Psychology calls this decision fatigue, chronic stress, information saturation. We seek clarity, but there's no space left for it to arrive. Mindfulness teaches that release is the first act of receiving, that emptiness is not failure, it is presence. Ask yourself, what am I holding on to that no longer serves me? Where is my life too full to breathe? What would it feel like to empty, not forever, but for now? Tonight, close your eyes and imagine a simple wooden cup in your hands. It is full, but heavy. Slowly, you tip it over. The contents spill gently onto the earth. Nothing is wasted. The cup is light again. Breathe. Make space. As Lao Tzu reminds us, to hold, you must first open your hand. So too with the heart. Let it be empty, so it may be full again. Story 10. The mirror and the mountain. There comes a moment, quiet, unexpected, when we look into the mirror and no longer recognize the reflection. Not because we've changed, but because we've forgotten who we were beneath everything we became. That moment is not a failure. It is an invitation. And sometimes, to remember ourselves, we must go where the self cannot follow. In a highland village near the clouds, there was a ritual observed every 7 years. The villagers, no matter their age or status, would take a solitary pilgrimage up the sacred mountain called Kazan. No guides, no maps, only silence. They called it facing the true face. Yuto, a renowned architect from the city, returned to his ancestral village for the ritual. He came not out of devotion, but exhaustion. He had fame, a beautiful home, and blueprints admired around the world. Yet each morning he felt like a stranger inside his own skin. Before he began the climb, the village elder handed him a small bronze mirror. "You'll need this," she said, "but not for what you think." The climb was steep. The air thinned. The noise of the world, emails, traffic, meetings faded. Yuto camped under starlight, ate rice balls and mountain herbs, faced his thoughts, unfiltered, raw. On the third day, lost in fog and hunger, he grew angry at the ritual, at the village, at himself. He shouted into the mist, "What am I even looking for?" A bird startled. Silence answered. He sat, pulled out the mirror, expected to see weariness, but the reflection was fogged, blurred. He wiped it, yet still no clarity. Then he remembered the elder's words. He turned the mirror, not toward his face, but toward the sky. And there, in the bronze surface, was not his image, but the reflection of clouds drifting, trees bowing, a hawk gliding. He laughed. The mirror was never for seeing himself. It was for seeing everything else more clearly. Zen teaches that the self is not a fixed object, but a process, fluid, impermanent, interwoven with the world. The true face cannot be seen in glass, but in the way we move through the moment. As Dogen wrote, to study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things. Stoicism echoes this in its practice of perspective. Marcus Aurelius reflected, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." The mountain does not give answers. It gives silence, space, and in that space, we remember what was never lost. Modern life often fragments identity. We become our roles: parent, partner, professional. Our reflection becomes a collage of expectations. But psychological wholeness requires integration, a return to presence, not performance. Journaling, retreat, silence, these are modern mirrors, tools not to judge the image, but to witness what lies beneath. Ask yourself, who are you when no one is watching? What parts of you have you placed aside to be accepted? Can you let the mountain within you speak, not in words, but in stillness? Tonight, imagine standing on a high mountain, the wind cool, the clouds gentle. You hold a mirror, not to see your face, but the vastness around you. Let go of identity. Let go of the need to be known. Be seen by the trees. Be heard by the sky. As the mirror reflects all without clinging, so may you reflect the world without losing yourself in it. As the Zen saying goes, when the mind is still, the mirror reflects perfectly. Story 11. The Last Lantern of Autumn. Sometimes, the most powerful farewells are not spoken, they are felt. A soft turning of leaves, a cup of tea left untouched, a door closed, not with anger, but with quiet resolve. Letting go isn't always dramatic. Often, it is the gentle extinguishing of a flame that no longer warms, and in that quiet dark, a different light appears. At the edge of a crimson forest, where maples set the hills ablaze each autumn, there was a village known for its lantern festival. Every year, as the season turned, villagers would light lanterns and float them down the river, each flame carrying a prayer, a sorrow, a wish. Akiko, a seamstress in her 60s, had prepared lanterns for others her whole life, but this year she had made one for herself. It was her first autumn alone. Her husband had passed in the spring, quietly, after 52 years. They had never spoken of death, not really, just a shared silence that seemed to say, "Not yet." On the night of the festival, Akiko walked to the river with the lantern cradled in both hands. Her lantern was different, not ornate, not grand, just simple paper, her handwriting faint on its sides. People around her laughed, wept, held hands. She stood apart, not out of pride, but reverence. As she knelt by the riverbank, the monk overseeing the festival approached. He bowed. "May I ask what your lantern carries?" Akiko didn't look up. "It carries the version of me that waited, that hoped he'd get better, that counted every pill, that lost herself in caretaking." The monk nodded. "And what remains?" She released the lantern. It floated unhurried. "Just me," she whispered. Zen teaches us the importance of release, not as rejection, but as renewal. The practice of non-attachment does not mean indifference. It means fully loving, fully grieving, and still letting go when the moment has passed. As the poet Ryokan once wrote, "The thief left it behind, the moon at my window." Loss does not take everything. It leaves space for what cannot be taken. The Stoics, too, embraced transience. As Epictetus said, "When you kiss your child, remind yourself they are mortal." This is not despair. It is gratitude sharpened by impermanence. Letting go is not the end of love. It is its most honest form. Grief is not linear. It arrives in waves, soft, fierce, unpredictable. Modern therapy affirms that the healthiest grieving includes rituals of closure, not to erase pain, but to honor it. Creating symbolic gestures, like Akiko's lantern, gives the psyche permission to move from holding to healing. We often carry versions of ourselves tied to past roles: caregiver, partner, protector. When those roles end, identity wavers. But the self is not lost, only waiting to be remet. Ask yourself, what version of you is ready to be released? What might be waiting in the space that follows? Are you willing to let go, not out of weakness, but in deep, brave love? Tonight, close your eyes. Imagine a lantern in your hands, not bright, but warm. Feel its shape. Know its weight. Inside it lives a version of you that once served, but now seeks rest. When you're ready, place it gently into the water. Watch it drift, not as loss, but as blessing. As the Buddha said, you only lose what you cling to. Let it float. Let yourself remain. Story 12. The House Beneath the Rain. There are storms that howl outside us, and there are storms that live within. Both can leave us soaked, splintered, uncertain of shelter. But sometimes, in the heart of the storm, we find a house, not one built of bricks, but of breath. A place not to hide from the rain, but to listen to it. In a sleepy coastal town where fog clung to the windows like memory, there stood a weather-beaten cottage known simply as Amaya, the rain house. Locals spoke of it with fondness, though few had entered. They said it belonged to no one, yet was never empty. Yuna, a therapist recovering from her own burnout, came seeking silence. After years of holding space for others, She had lost the shape of her own center. She had given good advice. She had kept her voice steady. She had smiled while something unnamed wilted inside her. She rented the rain house for a month. It was always raining there. Each morning, Yuna lit a small candle and sat by the wide window. The rain never stopped. It pattered on the roof, slid down the glass, soaked the wild garden outside. She watched it and said nothing. At first, she resisted, tried to journal, analyze, plan her healing. But the house offered no mirrors, no signal, no agenda, only rain. One night, curled on the tatami floor, she whispered, "I don't know what I'm feeling." The rain answered with a rhythm, not of words, but of presence. She wept, not from sadness, but from recognition. The storm inside her had finally been matched by a storm that did not ask her to fix it. The next morning, she sat again. This time, not to solve, just to be. In Zen, rain is often used as a metaphor for awareness, constant, impartial, cleansing. The practice is not to stop the storm, but to become the watcher, to notice the raindrop without naming it. As Dogen wrote, enlightenment is intimacy with all things, even the thunder, even the ache. The Stoics, too, teach us to make peace with what is beyond our control. Seneca said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Much of our pain comes not from rain, but from wishing it weren't raining. In today's world, we are taught to fix, diagnose, optimize. But not all pain is a problem to solve. Some of it is weather, to feel, to witness, to allow. Psychologists speak of the importance of emotional regulation, not suppression. Mindfulness-based therapy encourages us to name feelings, then let them pass like clouds. Yuna's healing began not with doing, but with staying. Ask yourself, where have you been resisting the inner storm? What would happen if you simply let it rain? Can you trust that you are the house, not the weather? Tonight, picture yourself in the rain house. The windows fogged, the candle flickering. Outside, steady rainfall. Inside, stillness. You do not need to explain. You do not need to escape. Just listen. Let the rain speak your name. Let it wash through without washing you away. As Thich Nhat Hanh reminds us, feelings come and go like clouds in a windy sky. Conscious breathing is my anchor. So breathe. Be the house. Let it rain. Story 13. The wind will remember. We live in a world obsessed with legacy, with leaving a mark, being remembered, building something that outlives us. But some lives leave no monuments, no biographies, no photographs. Only a ripple, a gesture, a kindness whispered into the fabric of someone else's becoming. And still, the wind remembers. In a fishing village by the edge of the inland sea, where gulls cried like memories and boats rocked like lullabies, there once lived a man called Now. He was not famous, not rich. He wore the same blue coat every season and never married. But children smiled when he passed. Cats followed him. And when someone fell ill or lost work, a basket of rice would appear at their door. No name, only silence. When he died, there was no funeral. Only the wind changed. A little softer, a little sadder. A young boy named Sota had once asked Now, "Why do you help everyone if no one sees you?" Now had smiled, handing him a persimmon. The tree does not eat its own fruit. Years later, when Now was gone, the village changed. Fewer children played in the square. The air felt colder. And Sota, now grown, could not stop thinking of the man in the blue coat. One night, he walked to Now's empty shack. Everything was gone, except a pair of sandals and a paper scroll pinned to the wall. It read, "Give without record, love without witness, and you will never be forgotten." Sota wept, and the next morning he left a basket of rice at an old woman's door. In Zen, there is no striving for fame or legacy. The teaching is simple. Do good, disappear. The act itself is enough. As Ryokan, the wandering monk, once said, "I watch the cherry blossoms fall and think, they do not care who watches." The Stoics remind us that reputation is not within our control. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Soon you will have forgotten all things, and soon all things will have forgotten you." This is not nihilism, it is liberation. We do not need to be seen to matter. We need only to serve the moment. In a world driven by metrics, followers, likes, recognition, invisibility can feel like failure. But psychologists have found that acts of anonymous kindness create lasting emotional impact, both for the giver and receiver. This kind of contribution builds what is called pro-social identity, a sense of self rooted in quiet meaning. Legacy is not about being remembered by many. It's about living in a way that those you touched, even briefly, breathe a little easier because you were here. Ask yourself, what good can I offer without needing credit? Who helped shape me though they never asked to be seen? What if my legacy is not a statue, but a single moment of compassion? Tonight, close your eyes and feel the wind. Let it carry you back to someone who once showed you kindness, silently. Perhaps a teacher, a neighbor, a stranger. Whisper thank you. Then ask, who needs that wind now? And what can I give, simply, gently, without applause? As the Dhammapada says, as the wind cannot overturn a mountain, so adversity cannot touch the wise who live without expectation. Be the mountain, be the wind, be the quiet gift. Story 14. The Guest Room of Grief. We often treat grief like an uninvited guest, something to endure quickly, hide away, or silence with distractions. But what if grief is not here to break us, but to remind us that we have loved, that we still care? Grief, when welcomed, does not demand answers, only a place to sit. In the middle of the old city, tucked between a temple bell tower and a forgotten tea shop, stood a ryokan known only by a symbol, an open door. It had no sign, no advertisement, but travelers arrived as if called. It was said that this inn held space for those who could no longer hold themselves. One such traveler was Haru, a retired schoolteacher who had recently lost her sister. They had spoken every morning at 7:03 a.m. sharp for years, until the call one day never came. No final words, no goodbye, just silence. Haru arrived with a small suitcase and a heart full of ache. The innkeeper, an old woman named Mio, greeted Haru without asking why she had come. She simply said, "I've prepared the guest room. It's already expecting you." Inside, the room was sparse. Tatami mats, a low table, a single candle. On the table was a slip of paper. "Leave the door open." Haru stayed for 7 days. She walked the garden paths, she brewed tea, and each evening she lit the candle and sat in silence. On the third night, she wept, not in agony, but in waves, like the sea remembering a tide. On the sixth, she wrote a letter to her sister and placed it beneath the candle. On the seventh, she opened the window and let the wind carry her breath outward. She left the room cleaner than she found it. In Zen, grief is not an error. It is an expression of love that has nowhere else to go. The practice is to make space for it, not to fix, not to transcend, but to bow to its presence. As the poet Issa wrote after losing his child, This world of do is, yes, a world of do. And yet. Stoicism does not shun grief either. It asks us to hold it with dignity. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." Grief is not weakness. It is awareness sharpened by love. Contemporary psychology affirms the importance of giving grief a place to be. Suppressed grief often becomes chronic anxiety, depression, disconnection. Therapists often speak of continuing bonds, the idea that grief does not end but evolves. We do not let go of those we lose, we let go of trying to hold them the same way. Creating rituals, letters, spaces, spoken memories allows the psyche to integrate the loss rather than fracture beneath it. Ask yourself, what part of me still waits for a goodbye I never received? What might happen if I offered my grief a room instead of a cage? Can I allow sorrow to visit without demanding it leave too soon? Tonight, imagine preparing a guest room within yourself. Not for joy, not for resolution, but for grief. Quiet, tender, unjudged. Light a candle in your mind. Say, "You may stay." Let the tears fall like visitors who've been on the road too long. Let the silence be your conversation. As Rumi said, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." Let it enter. Let it stay a while. Story 15. When the rope turns to silk. There is a kind of love that binds, not in devotion, but in desperation. A rope pulled tight with guilt, obligation, fear of abandonment. We call it connection. But real connection does not constrict. It breathes. It invites. And when we let go of the rope, we may find it becomes something softer, something like silk. In a small mountain town where the wind braided itself through pine trees and prayer flags, there lived a craftsman named Hero. He made rope, fine, strong, revered throughout the region. Farmers came for work rope, monks for ceremonial cords. His hands, though weathered, were known for their precision. But inside Hero's home, tension ruled. His adult daughter, Nami, had returned after a divorce, bringing grief and silence with her. They passed each other like ghosts. Bound by love, yes, but also by something more painful, disappointment unspoken. One winter morning, Hero invited Nami to the workshop. He handed her a bundle of silk threads. "We'll make a new kind of rope today," he said. She frowned. "Silk isn't strong enough." "Perhaps not to pull oxen," he replied, "but maybe strong enough to hold a truth." They worked side by side in silence, winding, twisting, braiding. Finally, Hero spoke. "I wanted to protect you, but I see now I only pulled tighter." Nami's hands froze. "And I," she whispered, "confused your worry with judgment." They finished the rope. It shimmered in the light, delicate, beautiful, useless for burden, perfect for ceremony. They tied it around a cedar tree, a symbol. We are bound not by control, but by choice. Zen reminds us that attachment is not the same as love. One constricts, the other allows. The art is in discerning when the rope we hold has begun to fray our spirit. As the Zen master Ikkyu once wrote, "Let go or be dragged." The Stoics also warn against enmeshment. Epictetus taught that we are each responsible for our own minds, our own path, even when love draws us close. To truly love is to release control and to meet the other without grasping. In psychology, the term enmeshment describes relationships where boundaries blur, where care becomes control and individuality is sacrificed for closeness. Healing requires differentiation, the ability to love without losing the self. Therapists encourage open dialogue, mutual responsibility, and symbolic acts, like Hiro's rope, to mark new beginnings in strained relationships. Ask yourself, what bonds in my life feel more like rope than silk? Where have I confused worry with love, silence with safety? What would it mean to retie the thread, gently with consent? Tonight, imagine holding a rope in your hands. Feel its weight, its tension. Ask, is this helping me stay close or only keeping me from moving? Now picture the rope dissolving, becoming silk, soft, light, flowing. Tie it not around a person, but around your own heart. A reminder, love, at its best, breathes. As Khalil Gibran wrote, let there be spaces in your togetherness. And in those spaces, let gentleness grow. Story 16, The Lantern in the Cellar. There are places we dare not visit, not because they are locked, but because we are. The cellar of the self is where old fears are kept, dusty boxes of shame stacked beside forgotten wounds. But buried within the darkness is not just pain. It is the place where healing waits, holding a lantern we once hid from ourselves. In a quiet village by a lake that never froze, there was a guest house known for its peculiar design. Each room had a door to a small underground cellar. The owner, a soft-spoken man named Ray, would tell guests, "Only go down when you're ready, and bring the lantern." Aya, a writer who had stopped writing, arrived on a gray afternoon. She had tried every retreat, every program, every ritual to move past the weight in her chest, but still the words would not return. She had lost not only her creativity, but her sense of self. On her third night, unable to sleep, she lit the lantern and opened the cellar door. The wooden stairs creaked. The air was musty, thick with silence. She stepped inside. The cellar was empty. No monsters, no hidden journals, no sudden revelations. Only walls, and the echo of her own breath. She sat on the floor, closed her eyes, and then it began. Not a memory, but a murmur. Her father's disappointment, her first rejection letter, the time she was told she was too much. The lantern flickered. She whispered, "I'm still here." And the cellar changed. Not literally, but the fear softened, the air lightened, the silence no longer punished. She stayed until the flame went out, and when she emerged, her first poem in months arrived like a feather landing on paper. Zen invites us not to avoid suffering, but to sit with it. In the shadows, we meet the parts of ourselves we were taught to hide. True healing begins when we stop running and simply say, "I see you." As the Zen master Hakun wrote, not knowing how near the truth is, we seek it far away. Often, it waits just beneath our feet. The Stoics remind us that fear loses its power when we look it in the eye. Seneca said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." The cellar is real, but so is our capacity to enter it with courage. In psychology, avoidance is one of the most common coping mechanisms. We avoid pain, failure, memories, but avoidance feeds anxiety. The cellar becomes scarier the longer we refuse to enter. Exposure therapy and shadow work are built on the idea that healing lies in returning to the place we once abandoned. The act of turning inward, of holding presence with discomfort, rewires the nervous system. It tells the body, "You are safe now." Ask yourself, what part of me have I locked away? What fear have I tiptoed around, hoping it would disappear? What might happen if I lit a lantern and descended? Gently, slowly, not to fight, but to witness. Tonight, close your eyes and imagine holding a lantern. Feel its warmth. Picture the cellar within you, not as a place of punishment, but of quiet return. Open the door. Take one step, then another. Breathe. Say, I'm still here. And let whatever arises, arise. As Carl Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So, light the lantern, not to escape the dark, but to see within it. Story 17. The Garden Beyond Regret. Regret is a seed that grows in the dark. It takes root in the silence after a sharp word, in the path we didn't take, in the apology never spoken. And yet, buried beneath that weight is a possibility, not for erasure, but for transformation. Regret does not have to rot. In the right soil, it can bloom. Just beyond the city's edge, hidden behind a crumbling stone wall, there was a garden that never appeared on maps. It was tended by a man named June, quiet, gray-haired, with hands stained by earth and memory. People said his garden grew strange things, flowers that only bloomed when touched by tears, herbs that eased more than just the body. One evening, a woman named Emmy came to the gate. She had lived a careful life. She had made all the right decisions. And still, a hollow followed her everywhere, the echo of a letter she never sent, a friend she never forgave, the child she chose not to have. She asked June, "Can anything grow in regret?" He smiled and opened the gate. June handed her a trowel and pointed to a bare patch of soil. "Plant your regret here," he said. Emmy frowned. "I didn't bring anything." "You did," June replied. "It's in your chest." She knelt and pressed her palms into the dirt, closed her eyes. Let the memories surface, sharp, sad, unfinished. Then, wordlessly, she buried them. For days, she returned, watered, weeded, waited. On the seventh morning, a flower bloomed, pale, fragrant, unlike anything she had seen. "What is it?" she asked. June said, "It has no name. It only grows when you stop trying to rewrite the past and begin tending to what remains." Zen does not ask us to undo what has been done. It teaches us to bow to it, to meet each moment not as a judge, but as a gardener. Regret, in this view, is not poison. It is compost, rich with the nutrients of awareness. As Dogen taught, a flower falls, even though we love it. A weed grows, even though we do not love it. Life unfolds. Our task is not control, but care. The Stoics agree. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good person should be. Be one." Regret is not a sentence. It is a signal, a chance to return. In therapy, unresolved regrets is linked to rumination and shame. But studies show that when we transform regrets into action, into service, into reconciliation, into expression, it becomes a tool for growth. Writing a letter never sent, planting a tree, saying "I'm sorry," even if no one hears, these are acts of psychological integration. Ask yourself, what memory keeps tugging at your sleeve? What would it look like to plant it rather than replay it? What flower might grow from forgiveness, not of others, but of yourself? Tonight, imagine walking through June's garden. There is a bare patch of soil waiting. You kneel. Place your regret there, not to forget, but to transform. Cover it gently. Water it with breath. Wait. Say, "You were part of me, and now you may bloom." As the poet Naomi Shihab Nye writes, sadness gives birth to slow-growing things. So let it grow, let it change, let it be beautiful, even here. Story 18. The Name You Once Forgot. Sometimes the most painful distance is not between two people, but between you and yourself. The version of you that used to sing without fear, the one who asked questions no one could answer, the child who didn't yet believe they had to earn love. That version hasn't vanished, only fallen silent, waiting for you to call their name again. In a misty seaside village where bells rang without clocks and children played barefoot in the sand, there was a shrine to forgotten things. No statues, just wooden plaques, names, wishes, dreams etched in fading ink. Sora, a corporate strategist who had long ago stopped believing in poetry, arrived by accident, or maybe by fatigue. She had followed a narrow road that wasn't on the map, chasing the sound of gulls. She carried no offering, just exhaustion. The caretaker, a boy no older than 16, handed her a wooden plaque and said, "Write the name you've forgotten." Sora stared at the plaque for a long time. She thought of her given name, her titles, her email signature. Then she remembered a name no one else knew, a nickname her grandfather once called her, when her hands were always covered in paint, when she made up stories for the wind, when she still believed she'd be an artist. She wrote it, hung it on the shrine, and wept. That night, the boy brought her tea by the shore, said nothing, just listened as she spoke of all the ways she had become someone successful and distant. He pointed to the horizon. The sea never forgets the sky. Sora stayed 3 days. On the last morning, she bought a sketchbook from the village store. Her hand trembled, but she drew anyway. Zen teaches us that our identity is not fixed. It flows, just like the tide. The self we cling to is often an adaptation, a mask we learn to wear to survive. True return is not regression, it is reintegration. The practice is to turn toward what was abandoned, not to judge it, but to welcome it home. As Dogen said, to be enlightened is to be intimate with all things. That includes the forgotten self. The Stoics, too, remind us to examine our roles. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Ask yourself at every moment, is this necessary? Is this version of me necessary? Or is it simply expected?" In psychology, the concept of the inner child points to the aspects of us that formed before we learned to perform, before shame, fear, or rejection rewired our behavior. Healing often begins when we reconnect with this inner self, through play, creativity, or remembering what brought us alive. This process isn't sentimental, it's foundational. Ask yourself, what part of me have I left behind to succeed? What name, literal or symbolic, have I not spoken in years? What would it look like to remember, not with sorrow, but with welcome? Tonight, picture the seaside shrine, the waves nearby, the wind lifting the corners of old wooden plaques. You hold your own. Carve into it a name, yours before the world rewrote you. Hang it gently. Breathe. Say, "You're not forgotten." Let that name echo in your chest. Let it guide you, not backward, but inward. As the poet Derek Walcott wrote, "The time will come when you will greet yourself arriving at your own door. Open it. You are already home." Story 19. The Pilgrimage of Enough. There is a mountain we climb not with our feet, but with our wanting. Step by step, more, better, higher. Yet no summit ever seems to satisfy. And one day, breathless and weary, we ask a question that halts everything. What if is enough? In the high valleys of a northern province, where shepherds once mapped the stars and snowmelt sang through the rocks, there lay a path called the Trail of 10,000 Steps. Pilgrims walked it not for salvation, but for clarity. They carried with them a single stone, a symbol of what they thought they lacked. At the end, they were to choose, keep the stone or leave it behind. Mina, a startup founder praised in magazines but hollow in her core, came with the stone marked success. Not because she had none, but because she never felt it was enough. She had climbed many things, but not this. The path was steep, winding, empty. Each step stirred old thoughts, milestones achieved, deals signed, applause received, and the quiet question always following. And now? On the fourth day, she met an old woman resting beneath a pine. "What's your stone?" the woman asked. "Success," Mina said with a bitter smile. "Ah," the woman nodded. "Mine was love. I carried it for 30 years before realizing it had been walking beside me the whole time." They walked in silence. At the final ridge, overlooking a field of clouds, Mina sat with her stone. Her hands shook. She thought of her mother's laughter, the taste of soup made slowly, the mornings she watched her team celebrate without her. She stood and set the stone down. It did not fall. It rested. Zen teaches us that desire itself is not the enemy, but the attachment to it. Tanya, the craving that pulls us out of the present, creates suffering when we confuse wanting with worth. The practice is not to stop walking, but to walk without chasing. As the Zen proverb goes, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The miracle is not in more, it is in seeing what already is. The Stoics, too, guide us to sufficiency. Epictetus taught, wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. To say enough is an act of power, not resignation. In a culture of endless optimization, productivity hacks, personal branding, goal setting, we are taught to measure life in gains. But research in positive psychology shows that well-being is most closely tied to gratitude, connection, and presence. The hedonic treadmill, a term for the cycle of chasing and adapting, reveals that without pause, achievement becomes emptier over time. Slowing down, naming what is enough, choosing rest, these are radical acts in a world of more. Ask yourself, what stone have I been carrying in pursuit of something I already hold? What if the summit isn't higher, but deeper? What would change if I declared, even briefly, this is enough? Tonight, imagine the mountain, the wind cool, the clouds below. You hold a stone in your hand, marked with your ache. Place it gently on the earth. Watch it stay. Now breathe. Feel your feet, your breath, the quiet strength of choosing presence over pursuit. As poet David White wrote, enough. These few words are enough. Let the sky be enough. So let it be. Let it hold you. Let it be enough. Story 20. The Seat Without a Name. There is a kind of silence that feels like exile. When you are present in a room but not invited. When your voice disappears before it reaches anyone's ear. But there is another kind of silence too. One that listens without judgment. One that waits, not for you to prove something, but simply to arrive. Somewhere in between, there is a seat, and it's been waiting for you. In a coastal monastery carved into sea cliffs, where wind met stone in quiet reverence, there was a hall of meditation known only as the listening room. It had no cushions, no chants, no incense, just a circle of empty wooden chairs. People came from far and wide, not to speak, but to sit. For some, it took hours. For others, days. But eventually, the chair would begin to feel warm. A man named Jiro came with a burden. He had been many things: soldier, husband, manager, but now, newly retired and quietly divorced, he was unsure what remained of him. He took a seat and waited. The first hour was restless. He adjusted, fidgeted, tried to meditate. By the third hour, his mind filled with old labels: strong, weak, success, failure. None of them fit, not anymore. On the second day, a woman entered and sat across from him. She nodded once, said nothing, just presence. Jiro's shoulders dropped. On the third day, a monk passed through and placed a simple card in Jiro's lap. It read, "There is a seat inside you, older than your name, deeper than your roles. Sit there." He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he stopped asking who he was supposed to be. Zen does not define the self as fixed. Rather, it reveals that identity is not the root, but the surface. Beneath roles and narratives lies something untouched, the original seat. As Dogen reminds us, to study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be awakened by all things. The Stoics, too, guide us inward. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Look within. Within is the fountain of good, and it will ever bubble up if you will ever dig." We spend years sculpting a self the world can see, and often forget the seat that needs no audience. Modern psychology recognizes the pressure of identity performance, especially in cultures where worth is tied to productivity, titles, or conformity. When those identities shift, through job loss, aging, divorce, relocation, many experience what's called an identity crisis. But beneath the crisis is an opportunity to return to values rather than roles. Therapists often guide clients to explore who they are beyond doing, through presence, reflection, and simply being. Ask yourself, who am I when no one needs anything from me? What part of me existed before I became useful? Can I sit, not to become someone, but to remember I already am? Tonight, imagine entering the listening room. The sea murmurs nearby. The chairs are waiting. Take your seat. Feel it support you. No name, no title, just breath. Just now. Say, silently, "I am home." As poet John O'Donohue wrote, "May you learn to see yourself with the same delight, pride, and expectation with which God sees you in every moment." So sit, not to change, but to belong. Again. Story 21. The Lesson of the Unfinished Bowl. We are taught to finish what we start, to polish, complete, perfect. But there is a beauty in the unfinished, in the work left open, the silence left unfilled, the life still unfolding. Some truths do not arrive through mastery, but through stopping and looking again. At the edge of a village known for its ceramic workshops, where the scent of wood smoke hung in the air and kiln fires glowed late into the night, lived a potter named Kenta. His bowls were famous, sought after by temples and tea masters. Yet, once every season, he made one bowl he never finished, left it half-shaped, unfired, cracked, and placed it on the windowsill of his studio. People often asked why. He never answered. Until one spring morning, a young apprentice named Toma, burdened by perfectionism and shame, asked not as a student, but as a son, "Is it failure?" Kenta smiled. "It's practice," he said, "for letting go." That afternoon, Toma watched as Kenta shaped a new bowl. It was smooth, balanced, near complete. Then the potter stopped, pressed his thumb gently into the rim, leaving a slight dent, set the bowl aside, Toma frowned. Why ruin it? Kenta wiped his hands. Because I was about to chase perfection and forget presence. He nodded toward the windowsill. That bowl reminds me, the work is never the point. It's how we are with the work. That evening, Toma took his latest bowl, one he had fussed over for weeks, and placed it beside the others. Unfinished, honest. Zen embraces the imperfect and the incomplete. The practice of wabi-sabi honors transience, asymmetry, and imperfection as essential expressions of life. To leave something unfinished is not negligence, it is reverence, a bow to the fact that nothing is ever truly complete. As the Zen monk Shunryu Suzuki said, each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement. The Stoics, too, warn against the endless pursuit of flawless achievement. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." What if, instead of finishing everything, we focused on fully meeting what is here? In therapy, the pursuit of perfection is often rooted in fear of judgment, of inadequacy, of not being enough. Yet research in self-compassion and mindfulness shows that accepting the unfinished aspects of ourselves leads to greater resilience, creativity, and peace. Leaving space in a project, a relationship, a day creates room for breath, for growth, for grace. Ask yourself, where in my life am I pushing to complete what may simply need to be experienced? What would happen if I stopped, not out of failure, but of faith? Can I see the beauty in what is still becoming? Tonight, picture a shelf of bowls, some smooth, some chipped, one still wet with clay. Choose one, hold it gently. Say, "You are enough, even unfinished." Now breathe. Let go of completion. Let in presence. As the poet Leonard Cohen wrote, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. So let it in. Let it shine through what you've yet to finish. Story 22. The Bamboo That Never Bends. We admire strength, the kind that stands tall, that never wavers. But true resilience is not about resistance, it is about flexibility. The tree that never bends will break. The one that sways with the wind survives. Sometimes the gentlest motion holds the greatest power. In a region often shaken by storms, there was a monastery surrounded by a bamboo forest. After every typhoon, villagers would visit in awe, not because the monastery stood, but because the bamboo did. Monks there trained not only in sutra, but in surrender. Their practice? To observe the bamboo each morning after wind or rain and bow with it. Takeshi, a former athlete recovering from a life-changing injury, came to the monastery angry at fate, at his body, at the world for stripping away what he thought defined him. He asked the head monk, "What will make me strong again?" The monk pointed to the forest. "Watch the bamboo. Learn from what does not resist." Takeshi spent days walking the groves. At first, all he saw was fragility, thin stalks creaking in the breeze. But then came a storm. He watched as the bamboo bowed low to the ground, leaves trembling, roots silent. By morning, the pines had splintered, the tall oak was cracked. But the bamboo stood, still bowed, yet unbroken. That day, Takeshi began moving differently, not to conquer his limitations, but to honor them. He learned to stretch, to breathe, to move slowly, mindfully. He began teaching others not how to push, but how to sway. In Zen, the bamboo is a living koan, strong not in defiance, but in surrender. Its hollow core symbolizes openness, its posture, humility, its resilience, quiet wisdom. As the Zen saying goes, the bamboo that bends is stronger than the oak that resists. The Stoics also speak of endurance, but not through force. Epictetus reminds us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. True strength is not about avoiding change. It's about yielding to it with grace. In trauma therapy, resilience is defined not as bouncing back, but as adapting, integrating, and growing through adversity. Rigid expectations of recovery, identity, control often exacerbate suffering. Flexibility, both mental and physical, is a key indicator of emotional well-being. Mindfulness, breath work, and somatic movement all teach the same lesson as the bamboo. Respond, don't resist. Ask yourself, where am I holding on so tightly that I'm beginning to crack? What might happen if I allowed myself to bend? Can I trust that softness can be strength? Tonight, imagine walking through the bamboo grove. A soft wind moves through. You bow, not in defeat, but in reverence. Feel your breath move like the wind. Feel your body sway with it. Say, I can bend, and I will not break. As Lao Tzu wrote, water is fluid, soft, and yielding, but water will wear away rock. So, be like water, be like bamboo, let the wind move through, and remain. Story 23, The Fence Between Two Gardens. Some distances are measured not in miles, but in silence. A single word left unsaid, a conversation avoided, a misunderstanding left to harden like stone. We build fences to protect, to define, to separate. But every fence also casts a shadow. And sometimes healing begins when we notice what has been growing there all along. In the middle of a quiet village stood two gardens. One belonged to Haruki, a retired carpenter known for his precision and solitude. The other belonged to Emi, a school teacher whose laughter once filled the air like birdsong. They had been friends once, but something had happened. No one remembered quite what. Only that one spring, Haruki built a fence. For 20 years, the fence remained. Then one summer, a storm came. A tree fell, and half the fence collapsed. The next morning, Haruki walked outside to assess the damage. Emi was already there, pulling branches from the wreckage. They stood, saying nothing. Finally, Haruki said, "It was cedar. I built it to last." Emi nodded. Everything lasts until it doesn't. They cleared the wood together. That evening, Haruki brought out 2 cups of tea, set them on the old stone between the gardens. No apology, no explanation, just tea. And for the first time in 2 decades, laughter returned. Quiet, cracked, but real. In Zen, reconciliation is not forced. It arises like spring, slowly, silently, after a long winter of stillness. True healing does not always require words. It requires presence. As Thich Nhat Hanh said, understanding is love's other name. If you don't understand, you can't love. The Stoics speak of equanimity, the ability to see past defense, past ego, toward what truly matters. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Whenever you are about to find fault with someone, ask yourself the following question. What fault of mine most nearly resembles the one I am about to criticize?" Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is releasing the need to hold the story like a weapon. Research shows that long-term estrangement, especially among friends or family, often stems not from deep betrayal, but from accumulated misunderstandings and unspoken pain. Restoration doesn't always come through confrontation. Sometimes it begins with neutral gestures, shared space, kindness without condition. Therapists describe this as relational safety, the creation of a space where both people can return without shame. Ask yourself, what fence in my life has stood longer than the reason behind it? What might happen if I stopped waiting for the perfect apology and offered tea instead? Can I sit in the in-between, not to solve, but to soften? Tonight, imagine two gardens, a broken fence, a stone between them. Set 2 cups of tea upon it. Picture someone sitting across from you, not the version that hurt you, but the one who once made you laugh. Say nothing, just breathe. Let the silence grow softer. As the poet Rumi said, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. So meet them, not to rebuild the past, but to share this present. Story 24. The Echoes That Did Not Answer. There is a kind of silence more haunting than anger. The silence after you've reached out and nothing comes back. A message unanswered. A door that doesn't open. The echo of your own voice returning with no reply. And yet, in that space, something else might emerge. Not closure, but clarity. In a valley where sound carried for miles, there was a cliff called the Echoing Wall. Pilgrims would climb to its edge and speak a name, a plea, a question, and wait. It was said the echo always returned, except when it didn't. One spring, a woman named Hannah made the climb. She carried a letter in her coat, one she had written but never sent, to someone who had left without a goodbye. When she reached the cliff, she read it aloud, and the valley stayed silent. Hannah waited. 1 hour. Then 2. No echo, only wind. She returned the next day, and the next. Still no reply. Others came and shouted, laughed, heard their voices bounce back in reply. But Hannah's words disappeared. On the 4th day, an old woman passed by. Still waiting? Hannah nodded. I thought the silence would mean something. The woman sat beside her. It does. It means it's your voice that matters now. That night, Hannah wrote a new letter. This time, not to the one who left, but to the one who stayed, herself. Zen does not promise that all questions will be answered. Sometimes, the koan is the silence itself. The lesson, to meet emptiness not as absence, but as presence in another form. As the Heart Sutra teaches, form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. What we think of as loss may be space, and space can be sacred. The Stoics remind us that we are responsible not for the responses of others, but for our own inner world. As Epictetus said, it's not events themselves that disturb us, but our interpretations of them. In relationships, ghosting or sudden disconnection can feel like a kind of psychological injury. It disrupts narrative and closure. But psychologists have found that healing doesn't require the other person's participation. It requires acknowledgement, self-expression, and the choice to keep living. Self-validation, writing letters, speaking aloud, creating rituals, helps re-anchor our identity when someone else's silence shakes it. Ask yourself, what echo have I been waiting for? What would I say if I knew no reply would come? Can I let the silence become a mirror, not of rejection, but of my own voice returning home? Tonight, imagine standing at the echoing wall. You speak. There is no answer. And yet, your breath, your voice, your presence remain. Say, I hear me now. Write the letter you thought someone else would finish. Let your own heart be the reader. As poet David White said, the courage to speak, even when no one is listening, is the beginning of belonging. So speak, even to the silence, especially then. Story 25. The Return to the Unnamed Path. Some journeys don't begin with a destination. They begin when everything familiar dissolves. The job lost, the role ended, the relationship unraveled. And in the quiet that follows, a strange road appears. No signs, no guarantees. Only a choice, to walk it, not knowing where it leads. In the outskirts of an ancient city, there was a moss-covered gate that opened onto a forest trail. No map included it. No one remembered where it led. Once a year, villagers left offerings by the gate, not to gods, but to questions, hopes, things they no longer understood. Aya, a former lawyer whose carefully constructed life had crumbled overnight, came to the gate with nothing but a small satchel and a heart full of fragments. She stepped through. The forest was dense, the path winding. There were no markers, only the sound of wind through cedar, the distant hush of water. Aya walked for days, sometimes in circles, sometimes in silence so pure it echoed. On the fourth night, she came upon a stone with a single inscription: "Keep going." And so she did. She shed her questions like leaves. She listened not for answers, but for footsteps. Eventually, the trail opened into a clearing, empty, except for a pond that reflected the sky exactly as it was. There, Aya sat. And for the first time, she did not try to understand. She simply belonged. Zen invites us to walk the pathless path, to let go of needing direction in favor of presence. As the great teacher Linji said, when you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. This is not violence, it is release. Even our concepts of awakening must fall away. The Stoics remind us that control is limited, but choice remains. As Seneca wrote, "If a man knows not which port he sails, no wind is favorable." Yet sometimes, not knowing the port is the beginning of deeper inner voyage. The unnamed path is not lost. It is raw, real, revealing. In modern transitions, job loss, divorce, aging, relocation, the in-between space can feel disorienting. What psychologists call liminal space is the threshold between identities. We are not who we were, and not yet who we are becoming. This space is fertile, vulnerable, necessary. Resisting it leads to anxiety. Embracing it invites transformation. Ask yourself, what path have I been avoiding because it lacks certainty? What if I walked not to arrive, but to remember? Can I trust the journey even when the map disappears? Tonight, imagine a mossy gate. You step through, no direction, just breath, just step, just this. Let the leaves fall as they may. Let the questions be. Say, I choose to walk. As poet Antonio Machado wrote, "Traveler, there is no path. The path is made by walking." So walk, with courage, with not knowing, with wonder. Final reflection and invitation. We've now walked through 25 stories together, stories of presence, loss, healing, and quiet transformation. If any part of this journey has touched something deep within you, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. What story stayed with you? What insight opened a new path? Your reflection might be the very light someone else needs. And if you'd like to continue walking gently with us through future meditations, reflections, and stories whispered from the stillness, please consider subscribing to our channel, The Empty Boat. May we keep floating together, weightless, present, and free.